The debate over the Latin Mass continues to heat up amid new restrictions and marginalized communities. What was supposed to be a simple liturgical debate has become a true watershed moment for the Church, a point of no return. On one side, those who call for synodality; on the other, those who defend tradition. But behind these words lies something deeper, something that could truly split the Church in two. And perhaps the schism has already begun. Stay with us until the end. After months of restrictions, cancelled celebrations, and communities left without a spiritual home, the battle for the traditional Latin Mass is once again making itself felt forcefully. In many dioceses, groups of faithful attached to the ancient rite have seen their celebrations reduced, moved to peripheral oratories, or forced to travel for hours just to be able to participate in a liturgy that for them is not just an aesthetic preference, but a way of living the faith. And while parish life adapts to the new languages of the synodal church, an opposite desire grows underground, that of rediscovering the silence, the sacredness, the sense of mystery that only the ancient liturgy can convey. It is in this climate that some cardinals and bishops, somewhat contemptuously described as friends of tradition, have begun to speak out. Prudently but courageously, they have reminded us that limiting the ancient rite does not bring unity, but rather wounds. They suggested that perhaps it is time for the Holy Father to review the imposed measures, restoring to the Catholic people the ability to freely draw on their own liturgical heritage. It is not, they say, a question of nostalgia or rebellion. It is a question of truth, of continuity, of love for the Church as it was and as it has always been. But the response from the ranks of ecclesiastical progressivism was immediate and vociferous. Editorials and statements accused these bishops of fomenting divisions, speaking of a colossal mistake in trying to revive what they consider obsolete. In reality, behind that harshness lies a fear. The fear that the ancient Mass, with its Latin and adoring silence, will make many Catholics rediscover a God who cannot be reduced to inclusive messages or synodal campaigns, but who remains mystery and sacrifice. The most direct attack against the return of the old Mass was signed by Robert Mickens, a well-known journalist and leading voice of progressive Catholicism. In the newspaper that for years has accompanied the battles of the new synodal church, Mickens published an article with the eloquent title, "Reviving the Old Latin Mass would be a colossal mistake." These are strong words, not merely an opinion, but a warning to anyone inside or outside the Vatican who dares even consider a possible revision of liturgical restrictions. In his speech, Mickens paints a picture of a distracted, almost selfish church, which, according to him, wastes time and resources discussing internal issues such as the liturgy, while the world has plunged into the deepest darkness of recent decades. It's an elegant way of saying that worship no longer matters, that what really matters are social, political, and environmental challenges. Yet, behind this modernist rhetoric lies a clear contradiction. The Catholic faith lives precisely through its liturgy, and to erase the Mass of all time means severing the very heart of the Church. Mickens's article doesn't even spare the prelates who dared to express doubts about tradition as custodes. He paints them as backward bishops or conditioned by young Catholic influencers who, he claims, don't understand the complexity of the council. The tone is contemptuous, ironic, and reflects the self-confidence typical of those who consider the world of tradition a marginal, folkloristic, almost picturesque phenomenon. But the numbers and facts tell another story. In the parishes where the Tridentine Mass has remained, participation is growing, vocations are flourishing, families are larger. In his attack, Mickens found an easy scapegoat, the so-called Catholic Generation Z. In a passage that readers didn't miss, the journalist lashes out at young people who call themselves Catholic influencers on social media, accusing them of theological ignorance and spiritual superficiality. According to him, these young people were poorly catechized, lacking the tools to understand the true spirit of the council, and therefore easily seduced by the solemn aesthetics and mystery of the ancient rite. It's an accusation that sounds paternalistic, especially considering it comes from someone who, for decades, has praised the voice of young people as the future of the Church. Yet the reality is very different from what Mickens paints. Young people who embrace the traditional Mass don't do so out of fashion or rebellion, but because they seek authenticity. They are children of a confused era, raised among improvised liturgies, sappy songs and homilies that speak more of climate and politics than of eternal salvation. When they enter a church where Mass is celebrated in Latin, they are struck by a sense of order, beauty, and adoring silence they have never known. And they discover that ancient language, rather than alienating them, immerses them in something greater than themselves. What Mickens calls ignorance is actually thirst. A thirst for the sacred, for truth, for a faith that doesn't change with every season. It's curious, then, that progressives are scandalized by a generation that chooses tradition. For years, they have preached freedom, listening, and diversity. But when that diversity takes on the guise of the Mass of all time, then it becomes intolerable. The paradox is evident. Those who invoke synodality as a path to inclusion cannot tolerate the existence of those who, following the example of the Fathers, wish only to worship God in silence. And while accusations against young people multiply, in certain ecclesial circles, the spiritual innovations designed to replace what has been erased are also multiplying. One of the most discussed is the so-called synodal rosary, a reinterpretation of the traditional Catholic rosary that offers new mysteries, no longer centered on the life of Christ, but on concepts such as diversity, inclusion, equity, and listening. It is yet another attempt to update something that, by its very nature, does not need updating. But in reality, behind the glossy language lies a dangerous theological operation, that of replacing the mystery of salvation with a moral and horizontal message, where grace gives way to social sensitivity. We no longer contemplate Christ's sacrifice, but the virtue of walking together. We no longer meditate on the Passion, but on the search for the other. For those who live the Catholic faith in its integrity, all this appears to be a profound impoverishment. A rosary that forgets redemptive pain and replaces it with words like equity and diversity does not console, but confuses. It's the sign of a church that stops looking to heaven, to look at itself in the mirror. And while these pastoral experiments multiply, communities that pray the rosary as always are marginalized, as if fidelity to tradition were a sin to be corrected. The paradox is that those who speak of an outgoing church end up closing the door to the very people who remain most faithful to its heart. A synodal rosary can never replace the faith of those who, kneeling, continue to recite the Hail Mary, as the Christian people have done for centuries. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.